Yes, it's time for you to clean up the yard. Get outside pronto were the words that echoed from my mother-in-law at my in-law's house. I was always treated like a servant, especially at Christmas. After doing all sorts of housework, I'd find myself locked out in the yard. It was tough at first, but as the son's wife, I eventually accepted it. If I could endure it for a little while, I could go home. That's all I thought about, waiting for time to pass. One Christmas, thanks to my sister-in-law, I had an awakening. My name is Ariel. I'm 27 years old and I work in an office. My husband Tom is 33 years older than me. We've been married for 3 years. I'm an indoor person, preferring to relax at home on my days off. I'm not antisocial, just shy and not great with large groups. When I first met Tom, he was kind and reliable. I met him at a drinking party I attended with a friend. I thought it was a small gathering, but there were many strangers, and I wanted to go home right away. Tom was the one who helped me. I didn't know there would be so many people. Let's have a quiet drink over here, he suggested. He's a cheerful person and probably fine with crowds, but he stayed with me, chatting about various things. When it was time to move to the after party, he discreetly said, "It's better to go home now." He let me leave early. Such gatherings often exhaust me, but that day, thanks to him, I wasn't tired and actually had fun. He remained kind and reliable as we dated. As an indoor person, he took me to places I'd never seen before, showing me beautiful views. He was always gentle, escorting me wherever we went. In the 2 years we dated, we never fought. But after marriage, I saw a not-so-kind side of him. Perhaps it was inevitable. No longer just his girlfriend, but his son's wife. When he came home, "Is dinner ready? Can I take a shower?" He'd always ask. I work full-time, though I don't have overtime. Sometimes, depending on when my husband gets home, I can't get dinner or his shower ready in time. "I'll do it now. Just wait a little longer," I tell my husband, always rushing to prepare. If he realized things weren't ready, he'd let out a deep sigh and sit down on the sofa to watch TV. "Oh, beef stew again," he'd remark. I try to prepare in advance or get creative, but if it's the same menu, he gets upset, accusing me of slacking off. Even with simple dishes, my husband never helps. Instead, he leaves his socks under the sofa. He seemed like the epitome of a henpecked husband. We had never lived together before marriage, and I was taken aback by this behavior, as we hadn't experienced this when staying at each other's places. I'm not the most efficient, so while feeling guilty, I kept thinking about how to do household chores more effectively. Apart from this, he was as kind as he always had been. I always thought it was just me failing as his wife. This feeling intensified whenever we visited my in-laws' house. Their house is an hour's drive from ours. I only go a few times a year, but I get so nervous I can't sleep the night before. My father-in-law, Eric, a henpecked husband like my husband, always sits quietly in the same spot, reading the newspaper. Coffee, I'd often hear him say to Mary, my mother-in-law, as if used to it. Mary prepares the coffee even before being asked and serves it right away. I guess my husband grew up seeing Mary do this and expects the same from me. Eric, being a man of few words, shows little interest in me, barely speaking beyond greetings. Mary is a strong, talkative woman, having been a housewife for years. She efficiently does her chores, probably finding my ineptitude frustrating. When at the in-laws, I cook with Mary, but she often scolds me. "What are you waddling for? Get those vegetables chopped now." I can only reply, "I'm sorry, I'll do it right away." With each visit, I felt increasingly disliked by Mary, always being scolded no matter how careful I tried to be. I blamed myself for not improving. Even when my husband saw me scolded, he said nothing, just lounging around watching TV or fiddling with his phone. Overwhelmed by the constant scolding, I eventually talked to him about it. "You just need to be more efficient. Mom doesn't usually get that angry," he remarked. His words weren't wrong, but they only made me feel more dejected. One day, a year into our marriage, while cooking with Mary as usual, she finally snapped. "I'm so frustrated doing chores with you. I can't take it anymore. From now on, you'll do it alone. I'll just give instructions," she declared. It seemed Mary had reached her limit with me, scolding me every time. "All right, I understand. I'm sorry," was all I could say. Yet again, after apologizing, I ran to the bathroom in tears, feeling pathetic for upsetting Mary so much. I felt terrible for not being a good daughter-in-law. From then on, under Mary's orders, I did all the household chores alone when at the in-laws' house. Even though I worked by myself, Mary's scolding didn't stop. I was always apologizing. Despite my efforts, my husband and Eric just turned a blind eye. Christmas was particularly depressing. My husband has 3 siblings, and his unmarried brother would come home for the holidays. Sally, my sister-in-law, living far away, only comes back once a year and spends her time at her husband's parents' house. Every year on Christmas Eve, Mary cleans the house from top to bottom, prepares roast turkey, and gets ready for the Christmas feast. On Christmas Day, she cooks up a storm and waits for her 2 younger sons to return. The first year, having helped Mary before, now that I was doing chores alone, it meant handling everything. Just thinking about it was overwhelmingly distressing. On the way to the in-laws' house on Christmas Eve, I did the grocery shopping Mary had asked for, and the car was full. Upon arriving and finishing unloading, Mary immediately instructed me to start cleaning the windows. One cleaning task after another followed, along with preparing lunch. By evening, I was exhausted, yet the cleaning wasn't done. "What are you dawdling for? At this rate, we'll have to continue tomorrow." Mary kept scolding me. I was too tired even to apologize. When I finally finished cleaning, it was already dark outside. Then, I started preparing the roast turkey and cleaning up, and before I knew it, it was the next day. I hadn't even started preparing for tomorrow's meal. Sally hadn't instructed me on the preparations. "It needs to be ready by 11 o'clock a.m., she said before heading to bed. My husband and Eric had already fallen asleep. I spent the night desperately doing the meal prep. There was so much to do, and as I worked, I couldn't help but cry. Sally probably started cleaning and prepping not just on Christmas Eve, but several days before. It was unreasonable to expect me to do it all alone. I understood that, as a son's wife, I had to accept this, but I couldn't stop crying. Eventually, morning came while I was still prepping, and I had to start cooking right away to be ready by 11 o'clock a.m. I finished everything in time, feeling relieved that I managed to get it all done by 11 o'clock a.m. "Wow, this looks delicious." "Thanks, Mom," exclaimed the brothers. Their words irked me. Just as I thought I could finally sit down to eat, Mary called me. "What are you sitting down for? It's family time now. You need to clean the yard," Mary said, handing me a broom. I couldn't believe it but had no energy to resist. Silently, I took the broom and went to the yard. From inside the house, I could hear my family chatting and laughing, seemingly uncaring of my absence. The in-laws' house is in the north, and it was freezing that day. I didn't even have time to put on my coat, so I shivered uncontrollably as I tried to clean. Tears and a runny nose wouldn't stop. I kept telling myself it was my duty as a son's wife, just waiting for the time to pass. 3 hours passed before I was allowed back inside. I was so cold I could barely move, but Mary immediately said, "Hurry up with the cleaning." Shivering, I did the dishes. I knew I could go home soon, as my husband had to work from the second day. That thought kept me going. By the time I finished, it was time to leave. I was exhausted, having not slept since the day before. In the car on the way back, I cheerfully told my husband, "Am I going to spend every Christmas like this? I'm tired, cold, and I can't take it anymore. Just be more efficient, and you can sleep next year. Stick on lots of disposable heating pads. Stop crying. It's bad luck for Christmas." His cold response angered me. I was starting to resent him. No, I think I already disliked him. I had time off until the 3rd, but I got sick from being outside in the cold and spent the rest of my Christmas break in bed. This treatment continued every time I went to the in-laws' house. The next Christmas Eve, I tried to prepare in advance and get more sleep. I even brought lots of disposable heating pads in case I had to go outside. But Mary criticized my pre-made dishes. "This is too salty. Start over," she said, rendering my efforts meaningless. Then she took all the heating pads from my bag. "Oh, disposable heating pads. These will be perfect for church." "Thank you," she said, taking them all. I couldn't sleep again because of the cleaning and cooking. After preparing the meal, I was sent outside to avoid catching the cold again. I wore a down jacket and took the disposable heating pads I had put in my pockets outside. Despite wearing thick clothes and carrying the heating pads, I couldn't stop shivering as it was snowing that day. About an hour later, a little boy came out of the house. "Wow, snow," he exclaimed. I was surprised. There shouldn't be any children inside. "Henry, put on your gloves," Mary called out. It turned out Sally had arrived unbeknownst to me while I was outside. Sally and her child had come to the in-laws' house. Apparently, she had a fight with her husband and didn't go to his parents' house this year. It was the first time I'd seen her since our wedding 3 years ago. When Sally saw me, she was surprised. "Is that you, Ariel?" she greeted. "Hello, Sally. It's been a while," I greeted her, still shivering. Concerned about me trembling, Sally gave me some disposable heating pads from her pocket. "Goodness, you're shivering. Why are you outside all this time?" she asked, warming my hands. "I was asked to clean the yard as the son's wife," I explained. I answered, and Sally, looking angry, said, "What? What do you mean? Come inside, and you too, Henry." She ushered me into the house. Sally approached my husband and the others who were chatting. "Hey, what's this about?" Ariel was shivering. "What if something had happened?" she asked forcefully. "Mom just asked her to clean the yard," my husband replied nonchalantly. "Tom, you don't see anything wrong with this. And Mom, what's this about?" Sally confronted my husband and her mother. Eric pretended not to know, and the two brothers-in-law looked uncomfortable. A son's wife should do what's expected of her. "I just had her do her duties," Sally's mother replied sulkily. "There's no such thing as a son's wife's duties in this world. How can you, a former daughter-in-law, not understand? You don't even realize how horrible this is. This is awful. I will never forgive you, and not just you, everyone here," Sally said, and left the in-laws' house with her child. I stayed at a nearby hotel. While soaking in the pool, I told her everything. Sally, too, had been harshly treated by her mother-in-law and listened to me with tears. "Ariel, you've been treated like a slave, haven't you? It's been tough. You don't have to endure it anymore. You can be free," she hugged me. I had always thought it was inevitable as a son's wife and endured many hardships, but finally, I realized it was abnormal. Feeling liberated, I also cried. Spending time with Sally, I felt the need to become stronger. After getting out of the pool, we ate the delicious hotel food, and exhausted from not sleeping since Christmas Eve, I fell asleep without realizing it. The next morning, I saw missed calls from my husband but ignored them, choosing to explore the area around the hotel with Sally and her child. Throughout this, my husband and Mary kept calling. "Ariel, it's okay to ignore him," Sally advised, so I didn't answer the phone and enjoyed sightseeing instead. Later that evening, when Sally said she was going home, I drove her to the station. As we said goodbye, "Ariel, I've done enough payback for you. The rest is up to you," she told me. I didn't fully understand. "Thank you for everything." I thanked her deeply and went home. When I got home, my husband was there, demanding, "Hey, where have you been? I called you so many times." Ignoring his frantic concern, he continued, "The house has been sold. It's my sister's doing." Confused, I asked, "What? Sally?" "Sally has married the heir of a national real estate company. Our house and the in-laws' house were bought through Sally's husband's company. The two brothers-in-law rented through the same company," he explained. "Sally, unable to forgive what happened yesterday, have listed our house and the in-laws' house for sale and filed eviction notices for the brothers' rentals. Within a month, the entire family had to move out, losing their home." I laughed at Sally's extraordinary actions, touched that she did all this for me. "You know about this, right? Tell my sister to stop. She'll listen to you," my husband pressed. Laughing, I responded, "I'll talk to Mom." He called Mary. It was hard to hear, but she sounded angry. "It's called personal responsibility. I'm leaving this house too, so it doesn't matter to me if there's no house. The family can live happily outside, right? Like in a tent? It might be cold and shivering." I teased while saying this to my husband and Mary on the phone. "What are you talking about?" my husband exclaimed. "The joke's on me. I'll send you the divorce papers," I said, packed, and went to my parents' house. I called Sally on the way to tell her I was divorcing. "Way to go, Ariel. I knew you'd make that choice. Let's go to a hotel with a pool again," she said cheerfully. I'm grateful to Sally. If she hadn't come that day, I would have endured terrible treatment for decades. Later, we officially got divorced. My ex-husband's family lost their homes. We used to split living expenses and manage our own savings, which I didn't know, but apparently he had hardly any. He had to borrow money for a new house. He was blamed by the in-laws and borrowed more for their initial costs. After the divorce, his debts grew, and he started working part-time at night. Serves him right. The in-laws had lived in a spacious house thanks to Sally, but now had to settle for a small apartment. Embarrassed, Sally rarely leaves the house, living quietly. I started living at my parents' house. When I helped with chores, Mom was surprised at my efficiency. I thought I was clumsy and hadn't grown, but I was wrong. I became skilled in household chores during my 3-year marriage. Sally and I still keep in touch and occasionally visit hotels with pools. Talking to her gives me strength. Becoming the strong woman like Sally is my goal. I caught you cheating, Susan. I just returned from a business trip when my mother-in-law suddenly came at me with a triumphant grin, accusing me of infidelity. With no recollection whatsoever, I had no choice but to echo her words. She probably thought I was playing dumb, her voice growing stronger as she continued, closing in on culprit. I had a hidden camera set up in the car. Lately, I've noticed some things left behind that don't belong to our family, men's belongings. Not just once, but several times. I've been suspecting that a man other than a family member has been riding in our car. That's why when you took the dash cam for repair, I was convinced you tried to cover up evidence under the guise of repair, didn't you? Then, she conveniently mentioned my recent business trip, alleging that I had been with an affair partner all this time, ensuring I wouldn't be caught on the dash cam. But unfortunately for me, she had her own camera set up. I'm sure everything has been captured on it, she said. There are 2 cars at my in-laws' house, and one of them was used by everyone living there, which included me. The car designated for everyone's use had an interior dash cam recording details of both road trips and inside the car. My mother-in-law, suspecting my infidelity, had it set up to gather evidence. When I sent it for repairs, she immediately assumed it was to conceal evidence. I was at a loss for words. Why did she suspect me to this extent and confidently assert that I was cheating? Most likely, it was because of my past job as a hostess at a lounge during my college days. My family wasn't wealthy, so I worked as a hostess to pay for my college tuition. My parents suggested I apply for student loans, but I declined. Working as a hostess provided flexible hours, mainly at night, allowing me to plan around my classes and other activities. Socializing with older men provided valuable learning experiences about economic structures and different industries, which proved useful in my current job. When I started dating my husband Mike, he knew about my past but didn't disclose it to his family, especially his conservative mother. However, during a visit to his parents before our marriage, his mother discovered my past job and erupted in outrage, demanding that Mike break up with me. Mike defended me, explaining that I only worked as a hostess serving drinks and having conversations. But his mother's reaction had already tainted her perception of me. I knew that, so why didn't you tell me? Mike sighed deeply. Because I knew this would happen. I was waiting for the right time to talk to you about it. How did you find out, anyway? With some hesitation, his mother replied in a faltering tone. Melissa started talking about how she wanted to work as a hostess to earn money. She apparently came across a top all-time popular hostesses article online and found Susan. Melissa is Mike's younger sister. She's into flashy things, has a tendency to change boyfriends frequently, and definitely fits the typical image of a hostess in general. So it's okay if your own daughter wants to become a hostess, but it's not okay for anyone else. As Mike spoke with a mixture of exasperation and disbelief, his mother's voice grew shrill. I never said it was okay for her. How rude. But you didn't scold her like this, did you? Wow, when you brought this woman here the first time, I thought she was a respectable young lady, and I was relieved. I didn't know she was a filthy woman. She deceived us. Susan is indeed very responsible. She worked as a hostess to pay for her tuition, not for mere leisure like Melissa. She didn't neglect her studies and quit right after she graduated. She even secured a position at a reputable company. Her performance at work was even better than mine. At these words, his mother clenched her lips in frustration while I was deeply moved. He stood up for me as I was being condemned, but I couldn't help but feel concerned about the deteriorating relationship between myself and the woman who could become my mother-in-law. Just as I was contemplating the challenges of marrying Mike despite my love for him, he surprised me with a proposal. But what about your mother? She would absolutely be against us getting married. Don't worry about her. My dad used to take his clients to lounges with hostess services for business, so he understands. He actually helped me convince my mom. Really? Absolutely. While I was skeptical, Mike was full of confidence. Despite my lingering anxiety, I chose to trust him and nodded in agreement. Our plan was to find a place for the 2 of us to live together after getting married. Mike, being the second son, always joked that if anyone should live with their parents, it should be the eldest son. His older brother wasn't married at the time but had a fiancée, so I naturally assumed they would be the ones to move in with my in-laws. But then we'd rather have Mike live with us, To my surprise, my mother-in-law, who had previously belittled and criticized me as the filthy woman, was the one who brought up such a proposition. I could have fathomed her intentions, but since we had already pushed through with the marriage against her wishes, I couldn't refuse when Mike voiced his worries, asking if I was going to be okay. I confidently assured him that I was going to be fine. Shortly after our marriage, we began living in Mike's parents' house. Our newlywed life consisted of living together with my in-laws and sister-in-law. Melissa had actually gotten married a little before us, but her husband was immediately assigned to an overseas business trip, so she remained at her parents' house. Just like Mike said, my father-in-law was understanding and treated me kindly. It helped that I had experience conversing with older men, so our talks were quite engaging. My mother-in-law didn't seem to approve of that aspect of me either. "She's just fooling you, dear." I could hear such backbiting quite frequently. She spread rumors in the neighborhood about me being filthy, and when she saw the designer items I had received during my days as a hostess, she would make snide remarks about my spending habits. At first, Mike and my father-in-law would scold her, but the shrewd woman eventually started to harass me when they weren't around. "Hey, since you're so extravagant with your spending, you shouldn't be keeping money around. Just leave it all to me, and I'll manage it for you." She had the audacity to come to my room and say that, leaving me dumbfounded. I'm not wasting money. These designer items aren't recent purchases. Plus, if I were to entrust anyone with my money, it would be Mike. "You're just deceiving Mike. Even if you gave it to him, you just pester him for money and end up spending it all. I should be the one to hold on to it. Besides, the other day, I witnessed you returning home after drinking with a man. You seem to have a penchant for men, don't you? That man happened to be my boss. If you work for a company, it's natural to occasionally socialize over drinks, isn't it?" Always making excuses, she demanded, "Just hand over your money to me." I was at a loss for words. But since I'm not someone who spends a lot of money in the first place, it wouldn't inconvenience me much even if I were to give her a portion of my salary. So, I replied, "I guess I could give you about half of my salary, but remember, it's my money that you'll be managing, so don't use any of it." "How could you say that? You were really rude." That's how I ended up giving half of my salary to my mother-in-law each month. She would come to my room to collect it, perhaps to keep it a secret from Mike and my father-in-law. Melissa, my sister-in-law, was more favorable towards me. She would approach me in a friendly manner and ask about my days as a hostess or seek advice on her friendships. I appreciated her friendliness, but it wasn't exactly comforting, given that she was far more reckless with her money than me but never got scolded for it. Plus, I noticed that she had been occasionally taking and using my personal belongings without permission. In the beginning, she quietly borrowed them and returned them, but eventually she stopped returning them. My mother-in-law's behavior was escalating as well. She would follow me. On my days off, whenever I interacted with a man, she would take photos, claiming them as evidence of infidelity. She'd share these photos with Mike and my father-in-law, insisting repeatedly that I was having an affair and should be kicked out. "I want to trust you." Mike spoke to me with powerless words that seemed to contradict his true feelings, after being shown evidence of infidelity by my mother-in-law for who knows how many times. "But the number of photos my mom brings to me, isn't it excessive? Have you been meeting men behind my back?" "No way," I interrupted him out of shock. "Your mom takes photos of random people I bump into or people asking me for directions, strangers I absolutely don't know." "Yeah, you're right, sorry." Mike's voice lacked energy, and I didn't feel he fully believed me. Melissa would buy into everything my mother-in-law said, often commenting, whether maliciously or not, "Susan, you really have a lot of men wrapped around your finger. That's amazing." Her words seemed to be taking a toll on Mike as well. My mother-in-law's boasts about having caught me red-handed came amidst this ongoing tension. I finally got definitive proof of Susan's infertility. With that, she summoned my father-in-law, Mike, and Melissa to watch the hidden camera footage with her. I knew everyone was suspicious of me due to my mother-in-law's outrageous behavior. Even Mike started to think I might be cheating, but just as strongly as my mother-in-law insisted on her evidence, I had absolute confidence that I hadn't done anything wrong. And at that moment, only, I knew about the shocking footage that was about to disappoint my mother-in-law's expectations greatly. My mother-in-law pressed the play button, and immediately the inside of a car was projected on the screen. Everyone except me held their breath. What appeared on screen was, in fact, Melissa indecently dressed and flirting with a man. That's right, I was the only one who knew about this. The man's belongings that did not belong to the family, as my mother-in-law had put it, were the belongings of Melissa's lover. What? Wait, what's going on? My mother-in-law spoke so fast and pressed the pause button on the remote several times, but perhaps due to her panicking, her fingers couldn't actually press the button, and the image of Melissa and Desiree continued to play. Melissa's voice filled the room. "Stop it. Turn it off," she cried out in a voice filled with anguish, on the verge of tears. Why? Why did this happen? But Melissa deleted all the footage from the dash cam. When I opened my mouth, everyone turned to look at me. Clearing my throat, I continued. "Earlier, your mother did mention that this footage was from her hidden camera. You let your guard down because you thought you had deleted your own affair from the dash cam, leaving only mine." Melissa, with a look of despair, directed her gaze towards her mother. "Why would she put a hidden camera? That's awful. It's like you're spying. If you wanted to capture Susan's infidelity, you should have at least told me about the camera. And why didn't you check what was being recorded? I can't believe this." Those words sparked anger on Mike's stunned face. "What the heck? You're okay if Susan is the victim of a hidden camera, but not you? Cut the crap. It's okay, Mike," I said, and continued. "You know, Melissa, dash cam data is usually stored on a memory card and can be recovered even after being deleted. The dash cam was acting up, and because I knew that you've been deleting things, I had it restored while it was being repaired. So, your fare is recorded on the dash cam too. Oh, and obviously, there's nothing of mine. I never cheated." Tears swelled up in Melissa's eyes as she stared at me. "Why? Why would you do this to me? We were getting along so well. Normally, you don't just take things that belong to someone you're close to, do you? And didn't you, along with your mother, keep saying that I was having an affair? If it really was a relationship based on mutual respect, we wouldn't do such things to each other. It's only natural to be angry if someone does that. I didn't take anything without permission." Melissa passionately argued to the point of straining her voice, but such lies won't hold up. "Yes, you have. I even have evidence. You didn't notice the hidden camera in my room that has been set up for a long time now, did you?" "Yes, for a long time." I could see my mother-in-law's body tense up at those words. A smile crept up on my face. "Well, it looks like he finally figured it out. It's captured on camera. The day you came to my room and accused me of being extravagant with money, demanding that I hand over my salary. I even have footage that shows you coming to my room every month to collect the money." My mother-in-law's face turned deep red. "That's because you squander your money. I was just holding on to it for you." "So, where's all this money you've been holding on to for me?" No rebuttal came. My mother-in-law's face remained red, and her teeth clenched in frustration. "I know what you were up to. You've been following me every time I leave the house. But I've also been following you when you go out, and you know what? You've been going to male strip clubs, haven't you? Multiple times a week. You needed money for your addiction." My father-in-law finally spoke up. He looked at my mother-in-law intently, as if pleading with his eyes. She lowered her gaze. "Well, it's true in a way. I may have gone there occasionally. But Susan, can we see the footage from your hidden camera?" When my father-in-law spoke, my mother-in-law unleashed her words as if she had been struck. "There's no need for that. Having a hidden camera in the first place is despicable. But you did the same, didn't you?" Mike said with a sigh. "Moreover, you were the one who placed hidden cameras in the car used by all of us and secretly followed and took photos of Susan. Susan only had a camera in her own room. Which do you think is more despicable?" Once again, my mother-in-law seemed at a loss for words. I went to fetch the camera in my room with my father-in-law, and we checked the footage. There was Melissa stealing my belongings and my mother-in-law demanding money and coming to collect it. Everything was recorded. I am truly sorry. Once we finished watching the footage, my father-in-law apologized. Even when I told him it was okay, he wouldn't stop apologizing. Mike joined him and apologized to me as well. "I screwed up. I should have stopped Mom from following you and taking photos. I let my own insecurities get the better of me. I'm sorry." He looked up with worried eyes and asked, "Can I still be your husband, Susan?" "Of course you can." At my words, Mike finally smiled. My father-in-law demanded my mother-in-law to return the money to me and also served her with divorce papers. Despite her pleas of having no money and begging him not to leave her, my father-in-law was resolute, and they ultimately divorced. She's now working full-time in order to repay me and cover her living expenses. I'm sure she doesn't have any spare time to visit strip clubs anymore. Melissa was kicked out of the house, and her husband, who is still on his business trip abroad, left her as well. It didn't seem like she was particularly bothered by the divorce, perhaps because she had always been averse to being tied down by one man. On the other hand, what seemed to hit her hard was having to repay me for the numerous designer items she stole from me. She finally started working as a hostess, but not being particularly bright or street smart, she doesn't seem to be doing well. There's even talk of her turning into a sex worker to make ends meet. While I can't say for certain, it seems she's desperate to make money. As for me, I'm living happily with Mike and my father-in-law in his home. As expected, conversations with my father-in-law flowed smoothly, and my husband would often ask to join in, maybe because he was jokingly jealous of our relationship. The three of us laugh and enjoy our time together every day. I'm a 33-year-old office worker, and my husband, Tony, is 5 years my senior. We've been married for 7 years, but currently, due to certain circumstances, I live with my mother. You might be wondering how I ended up in this situation. Let's rewind a few years. Tony and I decided to build a house together. However, at that time, Tony had just changed jobs, and our savings were slim. His previous job had been at a major corporation, but he faced insidious harassment from his boss, which took a toll on his mental health. After struggling with sleepless nights, he eventually found himself unable to continue working. Tony sought help from a psychiatrist and took a leave of absence for about 3 months. Despite his efforts, he couldn't bounce back, leading to his resignation. With only my salary to rely on, we managed to get by, but it was a challenging time. After 2 months of being unemployed, Tony started to regain his energy. He began taking care of himself again, and his psychiatrist was pleased with his progress. Seeing him back to this positive self was a relief. He embarked on a vigorous job search, but his resignation due to mental health issues made finding a new job difficult. Eventually, he found a position at a small company, albeit with a lower salary than before. His enthusiasm for the job was infectious, and I couldn't help but feel happy seeing him excited about his work again. It wasn't easy, but at least he was doing what he loved. We had once dreamed of starting a family, but with the uncertainty of our finances, we reluctantly put that plan on hold. Besides, I also cherished my job, and quitting wasn't an option. Just when we thought things were stabilizing, a new challenge emerged. My mother, Karen, was paralyzed in a traffic accident and had to rely on a wheelchair. With my father gone since my middle school years, she had been living alone in our old family home, which was far from wheelchair-friendly. Tony surprised us all by suggesting that we live together to support my mother. It was unexpected but characteristic of his kindness. Despite the uncertainty surrounding his new job, we decided to take the leap and apply for a mortgage. Securing the loan wasn't easy, given the short duration of Tony's current employment, but we refused to give up. With determination and resilience as our driving forces, we approached multiple mortgage companies until we finally found one willing to work with us. With the loan approved, we were ecstatic to finally buy our own home, where we could support my mother and build a new chapter of our lives together. I had always envisioned living in a home permeated with the comforting scent of wood, adorned with thick exposed beams on the ceiling, and boasting customized storage spaces tailored specifically for us. A kitchen adapted to my shorter stature and spacious flooring crafted from cypress completed the picture. Naturally, it had to be a barrier-free single-story house, ideal for easy wheelchair living. The anticipation of its completion filled us with excitement, prompting daily visits to the construction site. Finally, our meticulously designed dream home stood before us. Its ample yard provided a perfect spot for my mother, who had become hesitant to venture outdoors, to bask in the sunlight. Yet, amid our joy, there lingered a sense of dissatisfaction. The land upon which our dream home sat was a gift from Tony's beloved grandfather. Though not affluent, his grandfather held a special fondness for Tony. However, his sudden cancer diagnosis prompted him to distribute his assets, with Tony receiving the largest plot of land as per his grandfather's wishes. It felt like winning the lottery, but there was a significant caveat. The plot was merely a 5-minute stroll from Tony's family home. When we informed them of my mother's plan to move in with us, Tony's sister scoffed, deriding the idea as shameless and attributing trouble to my presence as a supposed outsider. Tony's mother echoed this sentiment, insinuating that caring for the elderly was burdensome and casting aspersions on me as if I were some sort of curse. In the face of their hurtful remarks, Tony staunchly defended my mother and me, asserting that his grandfather's gift should be cause for celebration, not contention. Despite his efforts, it became apparent that Tony's mother and sister harbored a level of malice that bordered on world class. It's truly remarkable that someone as kind-hearted as Tony could emerge from such a family dynamic. To me, he's akin to a beautiful lotus flower, flourishing amidst the murky waters. Tony often remarked about his family, citing them as prime examples of what he didn't want to emulate at home. I suspect Tony's grandfather bestowed upon us this land with the hope that we would care for his mother in her later years. Despite having other properties, he allocated Tony's sister a parking lot situated a mere 10 minutes walk from their family residence. While smaller in size compared to our portion, it already had a lucrative parking contract, offering substantial monthly income. Personally, I might have preferred this arrangement, but receiving any gift is indeed something to be grateful for. Thanks to my grandfather-in-law's generosity, we were able to construct our home without bearing the burden of land costs, significantly easing the financial strain. However, once construction was complete, we extended invitations to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family. During the building process, we learned that they had made unsanctioned visits to the site on multiple occasions. The disregard for our privacy was unsettling. On the day of their visit, they arrived an hour and a half later than agreed upon, offering no apology. Their sense of entitlement was palpable as they casually asserted their ownership over the house, likening it to their grandfather's property. Despite the muddy conditions outside, my sister-in-law and her husband traipsed through our pristine home without so much as a second thought, ignoring the slippers we had provided. When I suggested offering slippers for their comfort, my sister-in-law simply chuckled, dismissing the idea as unnecessary. "It's such a hassle," she remarked casually. "You can just wipe the floor." From the outset, the atmosphere was tense, and predictably, they arrived empty-handed. After touring the rooms, they eventually reached my mother's quarters, which boasted ample space and abundant sunlight. At my mother's request, we had designed it akin to a duplex, complete with its own kitchen, a room truly resembling a second living area. Upon seeing it, my mother-in-law declared, "I'm fine with this room. I want to live here." It was a presumptuous statement, to say the least. Then came the final straw. My mother-in-law remarked to my mother, "You were fortunate to have that accident, weren't you? Thanks to being paraplegic, you've moved from that old shack to such a nice house. Isn't it a turn of fortune?" My mother remained silent, her expression betraying her inner sadness. Internally seething, I was on the brink of erupting in anger, but before I could speak, Tony intervened. In a firm tone, he confronted them, questioning their humanity and expressing his disgust at their callous remarks. He demanded an apology, unwilling to tolerate their insensitivity. Instead of remorse, they responded with defensiveness. My sister-in-law accused Tony of being high and mighty, while my mother-in-law attributed Tony's supposed misfortunes to our marriage. But Tony refused to back down, vehemently defending my mother and our family. Frustrated by Tony's unwavering stance, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law eventually left, shooting me a contemptuous glance. My mother, witnessing the confrontation, offered Tony a heartfelt apology, acknowledging the pain their words had caused. In the aftermath, amidst the lingering tension, my mother extended her own apology to Tony. "I'm sorry," she said, a glimmer of remorse evident in her eyes. "I must have upset your mother and sister. I'm sorry I dampened the mood on the day of the housewarming party." Tony, however, insisted that the blame rested on him. "It's embarrassing," he said. "They really lack decency. But I'm truly sorry. I'm happy to be living with you. Please understand that." As my mother began to tear up, I reassured her. Our new home was close to Tony's parents' house, surrounded by neighbors who had known Tony since childhood. Their kindness towards us eased the transition into our new life. 4 months had passed since that incident, and we were starting to settle into our new routine. My mother's smiles were becoming more frequent. Then one day, I received a call from home while I was at work. Such calls were rare, and a sense of foreboding gripped me. My fears were realized when my mother, unable to conceal her distress, informed me that Tony had collapsed at work. Panic surged through me as I quickly made arrangements to leave for the hospital. During the journey, I tried to remain calm, conjuring up positive scenarios in my mind. But upon reaching the hospital, the sight that greeted me shattered all semblance of composure. My husband, who had left for work that morning in high spirits, was now lying unconscious, hooked up to countless tubes. I was overwhelmed, lost in a sea of disbelief and fear. The doctor's grim prognosis only intensified the sense of despair. "He's in a very dangerous condition," they said. "Even if he survives, we don't know if he will regain consciousness." I felt like I was in a movie, unable even to cry. I prayed fervently, but my prayers went unanswered. My husband Tony passed away just like that. In my state of shock, my mother and sister-in-law showed up as expected. Upon hearing of Tony's passing, my sister-in-law accused me aggressively. "Did you poison him or something? Were you after his life insurance money?" My mother-in-law joined in, cornering me with her harsh words. "Bad things always happen when you're around. Just like your mother, you really are a jinx." I was too devastated to respond. At that moment, my mother arrived in a caregiver's taxi, tears streaming down her face at the loss of Tony. Seeing her cry finally broke through my shock, and I began to sob as well. As we cried together, my mother-in-law sneered, "Oh, stop it. Can't you quit the fake crying? My son changed after meeting you. Now that he's gone, I don't want to see your faces ever again. Don't appear before us again." With that, she left the hospital. A funeral director soon arrived to help us arrange the funeral. Tony's cause of death was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. It was unimaginable. He had been perfectly fine that morning. When I informed my mother-in-law about the funeral schedule, she responded coldly, "He's always sided with you too, so I won't attend the funeral. My daughter won't come either." True to her word, neither she nor my sister-in-law and her husband attended the viewing. Despite their absence, many of Tony's colleagues and friends came to pay their respects. Their presence was a testament to the love and respect Tony had earned. The turnout at the funeral was similarly large, and I could see that Tony was deeply missed. Surrounded by people who genuinely mourned my husband, I felt a sense of solace amidst my grief. Spending the day with those who sincerely missed Tony reminded me of the positive impact he had on so many lives. After Tony's death, I received an email from my mother-in-law, but its content was so inappropriate that I chose not to respond. She was asking about the amount of life insurance money and continued to email me when I didn't reply, eventually claiming she had a right to receive it. I couldn't handle this on top of everything else, so I ignored her messages. When my mother and I arrived home, we noticed a light was on inside. "That's strange," my mother Karen said, puzzled. "I thought we turned off all the lights." "Maybe I forgot to turn it off because I was too agitated," I replied, trying to reassure her. "It's only natural to be upset given the situation." As I unlocked the door, we could hear the sound of a TV coming from inside, which was definitely odd. My mom and I exchanged worried glances and cautiously entered the house. To our shock, we found my sister-in-law and her husband sitting in the living room, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture and boxes. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Without missing a beat, my sister-in-law retorted, "Why did you just barge in here?" "Well, it's your first time, so I'll let you off the hook. We're taking this house. We sold your stuff, so leave." My mother and I were utterly stunned, having no idea what was happening. "Where did our furniture and belongings go?" I asked. She nonchalantly replied, "We had a resale company come today and they took everything. You had some pretty good furniture. We got a good price for it. We bought this new furniture with that money. Who wants furniture that a dead person used? It's bad luck, isn't it? I'm the type to care about such things. Your stuff is packed in these boxes. I don't know if you're minimalist or just poor, but it was a relief that you had so few things." The furniture was carefully chosen by my husband, and I couldn't forgive them for this. My mom was also furious, her face turning beet red, but she was too shocked to respond. I immediately called the resale company. After explaining the situation, they agreed to treat the items as stolen and promised to return them. Honestly, with my husband gone, I want nothing to do with his family, but I do feel a strong desire to stay in the house filled with memories of him. As I grappled with these conflicting emotions, my mother leaned in and whispered to me, "What do you think Tony would say if he were here now?" "Maybe he'd say we should leave." "I'm sure that's true. Tony always used to say, it's worth spending time with people who understand you. But there are also people who just won't get it, no matter how much you explain. It's a waste of time dealing with those low-level aliens." He was, in fact, talking about his mother and sister. I can see it clearly now. If we continue to live here, his family and relatives will keep interfering. So, impulsively, I signed a lease on an accessible apartment. My mother was taken aback by my decisiveness. I asked the resale company to keep the furniture for a few days, and 3 days later, we moved it to the new apartment. In exchange for moving out, I made my mother-in-law and sister-in-law promise to cut ties with us. And so, a new life began with just my mother and me in the apartment. Tony had so many life insurance policies, it was almost obsessive. He often joked, always with a smile, "When I die, you guys will be rich." True to his word, my husband left my mother and me enough money to be comfortable for the rest of our lives. Tony was unable to secure a mortgage when we bought the house, so as an employee at a major corporation, I purchased the house under my name. I ensured that even if something happened to Tony first, I wouldn't be stuck paying a mortgage for a house I wouldn't live in. According to the original contract, the house would be auctioned off if the mortgage wasn't paid for 3 months. In the hustle and bustle of life, 3 months passed in a flash. Then, I received a barrage of calls from my sister-in-law, Jessica, filled with astounding fury. My call history was flooded with calls from Jessica and my mother-in-law, Linda. What the heck? This is seriously scary, I thought. It felt like something out of a horror movie. Since they were being incredibly persistent, I picked up the phone and found out they were furious that the house was being sold. Apparently, when they returned home, they were unable to get in and found a seizure notice. Jessica and her husband had moved out of the apartment they had been living in since Tony passed away, and Jessica had also quit her job. I suggested they move back into their parents' house as they were panicking about suddenly being homeless. To my surprise, Linda had become so involved in gambling that she couldn't keep up and had sold her own house. It seems they have been living together for the past 2 months. From what I hear, they even sold their primary source of income, a parking lot in front of the train station, a long time ago. Now, Linda and Jessica's family are completely homeless. When Linda said, "I'm sorry for everything, let's get along. Can you lend me some money, please?" I replied, "I think it's best if you stay away since I'm a jinx. We're strangers now that we've severed ties." Linda fell silent, mumbling a weak In my mind, I was laughing, thinking, who's the real bad luck charm here? When I said, "I won't lend you a single cent," Jessica, who had been listening to the conversation, shouted, "You devil. Bring us the money right now." "I am a devil and bad luck, so I'm going to hang up now," I replied and ended the call. In truth, I had involved the lawyer for the past 3 months, pushing for the auction of the house. I thought it was an unusual case, but apparently it's not that uncommon. The house was sold without any major trouble, allowing our family a moment of respite. We plan to find a new home with the money Tony left us. Since it's just my mother and me, we don't need a big house. We prioritize security as 2 women living together. So, I chose a condominium with minimal noise disturbance. I remember something my husband always said when we built our home. People can get energy from the sun, so let's create a place where your mother can enjoy her hobby of reading in the garden without feeling self-conscious. With those words, he had made a spacious courtyard for her. So, I looked for a condo with a large balcony where she could enjoy her coffee and read. It's smaller than our previous home, but the room is spacious enough to house the furniture my husband proudly chose. The piece of land that was gifted to us by Tony's grandfather was expansive, and the house sold for more than expected. With that money, I bought a rather luxurious condominium. The security is top-notch, so my worrywart husband would surely rest easy. I heard rumors about my in-laws' family. Our old neighbors were worried about my sister-in-law's family suddenly moving in. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family were left homeless. They even tried to borrow money from neighbors. In the end, they couldn't borrow anything and ended up living in public housing after consulting with the community. But they're stubborn people, so it seems the trouble never ends. From what I've heard, they caused a commotion by having a barbecue on their small balcony. Their thoughtless actions must have shocked the locals. Whether due to a lack of money or just frustration, they seem to have loud arguments every night. People say they're causing such a racket that it sounds like things are being thrown around. My sister-in-law's husband left a long time ago, and now it's just her and Linda living together. It's quite the contrast to my peaceful life with my mother. Although we're both 2-member households, it seems that the neighbors are banding together to try to get this nuisance family evicted. No matter where you go, if you're a nuisance, people won't welcome you. What goes around comes around. I just want to live peacefully and quietly, estranged from my embarrassing family. I believe that Tony is surely watching over us. From now on, I plan to live my life without causing trouble to others and do my best to live not just for myself, but for Tony as well.